let's get started. Welcome everybody to our webinar series, and this is sponsored by NRBS, and we want to encourage you all to be checking out the different CE series that we have in the sponsor series, as well as our wonderful podcast, Healthy Brain, Happy Body. And it is my pleasure today to introduce Dr. Christine Tyrell Baker. She's going to be talking about her practice with PIR-HEG neurofeedback, and she is a licensed clinical psychologist. She's been practicing for more than 20 years. She's in Fayetteville, New York. She has her PhD from the University of Delaware and did her undergraduate work at the University of Cornell, or Cornell University. And she is currently running a practice in a private practice in Fayetteville. And she's also the clinical faculty in the Upstate Medical University Department of Psychiatry, where she's supportive to the people there. And she has been championing and implementing evidence-based practice and person-centered care. She helps improve the quality of care of people with serious mental illness. And without further ado, Christine, I'd like to turn it over to you. Welcome.
Thank you, Lexi. Appreciate it. Appreciate this opportunity to talk about my practice and the data I've collected, and in particular talking about neurofeedback in terms of the neurofeedback relationship and how we can shape the process of working with people through what we attend to in that relationship as different moments sort of emerge in the progress with neurofeedback. So I'm excited to talk about that today. I'm going to share my screen and get to the slides. Okay. So I'm assuming everyone can see that. So today's talk is harnessing the power of the neurofeedback relationship, intentional practice for better patient outcomes. As Lexi said, I work exclusively with PIR-HEG neurofeedback. And so this talk is coming from that perspective, but I think it has broader implications for how we think about intentional practice and neurofeedback and what the opportunities are there. So Wellbeing CNY is my organization. We're interested in the integration of neurofeedback into different kinds of clinical models, and particularly interested in neurofeedback systems like PIR-HEG, which are easy to implement and have some efficacy or some application across diagnostic categories. Just quickly, I have an upcoming clinical training, one-day live on Zoom training on December 1st. It introduces people to the model that I'm working on and how to really get enhanced clinical outcomes and how to think about why it works, how to capitalize on how it works with people in clinical mental health care. And there's CEUs associated with that training. If you're interested, you can visit my website and register for it there. Okay, so this is my my model, or my way of thinking about what's the opportunity here in terms of the neurofeedback relationship that's different than maybe other types of mental health care or other kinds of therapeutic relationships. So as you probably experience as well, people come into the office having tried a lot of different types of treatment often. And we know that a lot of types of mental health treatment can be effective over time, and can be effective for different people. But there seems to be sort of a diffuse understanding of this question, am I getting better? If you ask people, is what you've done in the past or what you're currently doing helping? they don't know quite how to answer the question. In some ways, they know it's helping, and in other ways, they're not sure. And so I think that the impact of a lot of types of treatment is clouded by, the response time, how long it takes sort of for different types of treatment to work, and the non-specificity of sort of where we're going and how we're going to get there. So I think that neurofeedback is an interesting alternative, or a different model in a way of how of increasing our ability to get to the intended result, to know what that result is, and the ability to get there quickly adds to the observability of these effects and enhances sort of what we can do in the treatment, in the moment, while these effects are coming on board, to enhance them and to put them in play in a person's overall kind of health. So today I'm going to talk about sort of how we can think about that, and what would allow us to make that kind of progress in the neurofeedback relationship. So like I said, my direct experience of this in terms of where are we going in neurofeedback, what are some of the, what's the intended result? This comes from using prefrontal, non-invasive neurofeedback across diagnoses. So with people with anxiety, depression, trauma, stress, and ADHD, variety of common mental health kind of disorders. So, and I'm going to talk just for a few minutes about my research and how I understand this. But the intended result, when we think about healthier brains and brains that probably have had the experience of new brain learning through various types of neurofeedback, and certainly in prefrontal neurofeedback, we see these kinds of overall changes, right? So although there may be an intention to deliver the neurofeedback because the person has panic disorder and needs something that's going to work for that, or because they have migraines, or because they have ADHD, we're seeing results when the brain changes that are also more global than that, right? They're not specific only to the symptom you're targeting, but also result in other kinds of changes and improvements. And I think it's important to look at that whole. So when we look at it on the whole intentionally, the intended result involves some of these things, right? Enhanced executive function, inhibition of highly stressed and stuck emotional states, the accrual of coping accomplishments, meaning ways in which people are pausing, changing their automatic pattern of coping and responding to stressful events. One of the things that my research shows strongly, and that I'm sure you all observe, is an increase in self-agency and coping self-efficacy, people's confidence in themselves and confidence in their ability to initiate things and to cope with things differently. And also the intended result of integration, right? Of being able to integrate kind of different states of mind while staying kind of on the perch, staying in control. And then also integrating these new coping accomplishments into their view of themselves in a more global way. So from my perspective, the big global change that we see in neurofeedback and in brain healing is that some of these things become really reliable in people's lives. And so how do we, knowing that, right, knowing that ahead, knowing that that's the intention, is to watch people change in this general direction, how do we use our work to kind of enhance that and to really to capitalize on the moment? So from my perspective, by tracking the onset, or kind of how this intended result is playing out or showing up for the person, we can take advantage of key clinical moments in the neurofeedback relationship. So the research I've done is both qualitative and quantitative. applying PIR, HEG to my clients in my practice across diagnoses, and then observing those effects, documenting that in terms of what people tell me about their experiences, and then also documenting it in terms of some questionnaires that people fill out every 5 sessions in my practice. So this is the article that recently came out in Neuroregulation. And it's in the Clinical Corner in the current issue. And so I'm just going to highlight a couple of things that kind of inform the talk today. So the study was done over a period of time, and this basically using everyone in my practice who came in and was provided with kind of PIR, HEG once a week, which was my most common kind of frequency, not more than once a week, and collecting data at baseline and then every 5 sessions. And you can see, had data on 66 people after 5 sessions, 46 after 10, and 21 after 15 sessions. These are the quantitative measures that we talk about in the article. So the GAD-7, the PHQ-9 measurement of depression, so simple screening tools, a measure of coping self-efficacy, so confidence in one's ability to overcome challenges of emotional coping in particular, and then global or general self-efficacy, which really emphasizes personal agency or the belief that one's actions are responsible for their success. And then lastly, a measure that I created based on the reports from initial clients telling me sort of what was different for them as they had PIR, HEG over a period of time. And this is that measure called limbic overload. You get a little flavor of some of the questions here, trying to capture the kinds of experiences related to emotional reactivity, lack of inhibition, and sort of general kind of system overwhelm. And then looking at that, at baseline, and then how does that change? So these questions are rated on a 10-point scale and then summed up as an overall measure of what I'm calling limbic overload. Okay. So going through the data just quickly again to give you a flavor of it and understanding of kind of where I'm coming from in terms of thinking about what are the key opportunities in neurofeedback treatment relationship. This is sort of the pattern of results. And so you're looking at limbic overload scores, that's summary of some of these, how highly these items were rated. And you're looking at baseline, and then after 5 sessions of PIR, HEG, after 10, and after 15. And again, this is across several clients. So looking at these changes over about 60 clients, 40 clients, and 20 clients. Okay. So, and the patterns are essentially the same for the other measurements. So, anxiety decreasing from a 12 on average to an 8 to a 6 to a 4. Depression. And then general self-efficacy. So general self-efficacy is kind of thought of as a global view of oneself in a lot of ways, a global view of one's agency. It's rated on a 30-point scale, so from 10 to 40. And so these changes, although they're small in terms of actual number, they're large in terms of variance. And so that's something to think about, how neurofeedback affects people's general self-efficacy and coping self-efficacy. So a measurement that asks a bunch of questions about when things aren't going so well for you, how capable do you feel of doing the following things, like breaking a problem down into smaller parts or reaching out for help or things like that, key coping behaviors. And as people came in for this kind of neurofeedback, over time, their scores in terms of their confidence and their ability to execute different types of coping behaviors increase with time significantly. And so, the data is not only consistent, it's also really the effect sizes are large. And so this is just another look at it. This is looking specifically at depression and anxiety on these scales, the PHQ and the GAD-7, and looking at the number of people that fall into the different categories over time. So you can see when we started out in the study at baseline, about as many people were reporting severe depression as they were mild depression, right? Different people reporting different amounts. And then as you go through it, at the, by the end of the moderate and severe categories are dwindling. And by after 15 sessions, nobody is reporting anything but mild depression. Similarly with anxiety, you're seeing, and this is really just to demonstrate, again, the strength of the effect. It's not so much that it's about anxiety or depression. It certainly is, and that those are major clinical improvements. But the strength of how many people are benefiting and how much their symptoms are changing in a relatively short period of time. Another interesting finding, this is a brief measure of dissociation, and looking at those scores again from baseline to after 5 to after 10 to after 15, showing some significant decreases in dissociation. So here are some just key takeaways that inform, again, what we're talking about in terms of what are the what's the advantage and the possible opportunity clinically when you see these kinds of changes happen so quickly for people. Sorry, I'm having a hard time seeing the top of my slides. So we're talking about, really strong improvements after 5 sessions. That means, if we're doing sessions once a week, that means within 5 or 6 weeks. Progressive improvements, so statistically significant changes between 0 and 5 sessions, but also between 5 and 10 and 10 and 15 sessions. Really very marked changes in anxiety and depression, dissociation, and increases in coping self-efficacy and general self-efficacy. So that gives some perspective, I guess, some view, some story to kind of what you might see as this overall direction that we're seeing across diagnoses. So a change in a change in executive function that is about better inhibition of symptoms and overall being able to function in a way that is more inhibited. Change in coping self-efficacy, the building of coping self-efficacy, again, in a relatively short time frame. And that's important, I think, in terms of how we see it and what we do with it. Also, a change in the capacity to be in contact with emotions without getting overwhelmed. So the same thing happening, a person might be triggered or thrust into a very stressful situation, and the ability to kind of know what's happening, not being zoned out or dissociated, not being overreactive, but being in direct contact with emotions without getting overwhelmed. And then change in the capacity to reflect and learn and rework assumptions. And all of this in my, from what clients have told me, and then the data kind of seem to highlight this opportunity to kind of, as these changes occur quickly, to notice them and use them in the therapeutic relationship to really build people's confidence and to get the biggest change in the shortest time. So I see the neurofeedback practitioner as a key role in a lot of different ways. I'm going to talk about this first one, an ambassador to health. So both based on people's experiences of living in brains that are not well regulated, and also in our general cultural context, this idea of what it means and how a brain would function that's functioning well when it comes to emotional reactivity seems to not be clearly understood, right? So people might expect that a brain that's working really well is not going to feel a lot of emotions, or might feel them in a very controlled sort of way. And so to help people kind of reinterpret, what does it mean to have a healthy brain? What is that going to look like in your function? And so that's an ambassador to health. It might also be like sort of a teacher of certain principles related to stress and brain learning and health. But as we go through the talk, you'll see how these different roles kind of pop out. Being an ambassador to a view of health, a teacher, someone who can notice progress and highlight it, and someone who can help people build their own efficacy in coping and in general as a person, and integrate those new experiences of capability into their overall self-view. So in terms of health and the importance of coping, this is what I want to talk about now is just how I see biofeedback and neurofeedback connected to an overall global health progression. Okay, so this is from a model called the salutogenic model, which basically says what predicts health. We know a lot of things about what predicts disease, but what predicts health? And so the general view is related to stress and the resolution of tension associated with stress. Okay, so health is predicted when stressors are perceived as manageable, enough that the automatic attention associated with those stressors can be recognized, supported, and released. Disease is predicted when stressors are so overwhelming that the survival and protection systems hijack this, making it so that we can't recognize them, support them, and release them. So basically, disease is predicted when there's a lot of unresolved tension in the system. Okay, so from my experience in doing this neurofeedback and collecting the data, I'm sort of thinking about this along the lines of neurofeedback producing or providing a new foundation. And this is why it's so important to think about what's our role in this, right? So we have this opportunity where a new foundation is being laid through neuroplasticity, hopefully a foundation that really is clearly an enhancement of executive functioning and emotional tolerance. Again, across diagnoses, across in a more global way, in a more global functioning way. And in the talk today, we're going to talk about how, by building on that foundation through a real clarity on how self-efficacy and empowerment and reflective learning emerge and can emerge quite naturally from those changes, that people can end up with an enduring confidence in their coping. And from that model perspective, from the salutogenic model perspective, that's where we're going to hit into something that's going to have an ongoing, self-perpetuating effect on health. And so with that in mind, thinking about what are the key things to pay attention to in this potential progression towards health. Okay. And that, kind of what's the intentional approach to this, given what we understand. Okay, so one thing, and I'm sure most people do this in a various ways, is this role of orienting people to the stress system, its impact, redefining sort of their symptoms and struggles through that lens, clarifying why and how neurofeedback can help in that context. And really, I also, going back to kind of my original thing about people coming in and talking about more traditional treatments and their experience with them. One of the things that mental health is not very good about often is giving people hope. Honestly, in a lot of ways, we talk, people come into therapy in particular, and we sort of, we know we can help, but we're not sort of overly confident. We do a lot of, making subtle references to everyone's different, and I can't guarantee results and things like that. And that makes sense given the complexity of our field. But I think that when we can say with more clarity, this is how it seems that your system's functioning, and with this change that neurofeedback can assist you with, this is how things could change. And to be able to give people some clear view, like a map of that, an ability to kind of to say it plainly in a way that sort of clarifies that there is something that we can do. And it's not generalized, it's not diluted through the process of, we'll just see what happens, and we'll notice it, and we'll know it if it comes. But more intentional and more clear. And like I said, also reinterpreting health in a certain way, that people who have healthy emotional systems are good copers, right? That they don't have things that are easy, or like a steady state, where they stay calm all the time, or they handle things in a certain way that their life is less chaotic or less complicated. But that healthy brains means good coping, greater connection to oneself, and being able to manage one's emotions in new ways. So I think that's one of the major intentional roles we can play, is orienting people. And then also at the beginning of treatment, I always kind of really spell out what are the indicators that we're going to be looking at to see if things have changed. What are we measuring essentially together, whether it's through our discussions each time or through some quantitative measurement. Okay. So now I also want to talk about this key idea of coping accomplishments. That, within 5 or maybe 10 sessions, depending on what kind of system you're using and how often you do them, how often you do your sessions, clients are likely to be having coping performance accomplishments. Okay. And so how can we be intentional with that, as we can really zero into that with our attention, be curious about how people are responding to their events in their lives, be a witness to the new function, the new accomplishments, noticing changes both in how people respond to stressors, how they experience their stressors, and what they avoid and what they don't avoid anymore. So really being clear about how tension works in their system, and what the form is when that kind of becomes more manageable. What's the form of how they're responding to things and how that's changing? This is really important when you think about self-efficacy theory, okay? So the key variable that we're trying to influence is perceived self-efficacy, right? So it's really important that we think about that word perceived. When people perceive themselves as having the ability for their actions to influence a result that they want, and they perceive that, then that predicts outcomes like persistence, good performance, and approach versus avoidance. And when we talk about coping, of course, in the greater sense of treatment, this is what we want, right? Is we want people to perceive themselves as capable of coping, so that they will persist, They will perform when life dictates that they need to, and they will learn how to approach situations so that long-standing patterns of avoidance don't set up in their lives, which just cause more problems in the long run. And in Bandura's theory, performance accomplishments, right? So the experience of success essentially is what predicts that pathway. When you think about self-efficacy with things like kids and learning in school, right? It's their actual experiences of how successful that they've been that has a significant influence on their perceived self-efficacy, and then what they do when it comes to a test. And so by highlighting performance accomplishments in the area of coping, we sort of build momentum, and we build this snowball kind of rolling in the right direction where people are getting more and more confident in their coping. And my understanding and my experience of this is that it's even more salient when it's clearly observed, right? When, again, we're paying attention to that area of perception, not just if they're doing things differently, but are they noticing that they are? And that's really important to help people notice. So this is, I think, maybe one of the most important areas of opportunities that we have, is to help people notice. And these are just some quotes from Deb Dana and Bandura about how without observation, clients can miss these moments of subtle change and kind of reinterpret their experiences more in light of what habitually has been true for them. And again, then we miss the opportunity for perception to kind of build towards performance accomplishment and the capacity to handle things in new and different ways. And so that's one really key takeaway, is thinking about how we can attune to that. And then here's the next one. As you know, and again, watching these effects over time, interviewing people about them, seeing the impact of PIR-HEG on the overall functioning of the person, and seeing that in a relatively quick time frame, I think has allowed me to notice some things that are important to tune into. So as overall arousal and the associated tension with that decreases when there's better brain control, better self-regulation, the capacity to be with one's own experiences and to use emotions as information seems to increase. So people, my experience of this is that the usual patterns of how people relieve tension in their lives start to change. And their ability to tolerate new emotions changes also. So they're able to stay present and grounded, to keep their system away from extremes, and to use emotional information and emotional states to learn, grow, and change. So you might notice that people say things like, I can be sad now, or I can be sad, or I was angry and I didn't need to change that. There wasn't anything wrong with feeling that way. I just knew that I was, right? So that's what I often would say, like people's emotional repertoire is expanding, where they can experience these states without overwhelm, and they can notice them and be curious about them. So another aspect of this is and I don't know if other people experience this with the types of neurofeedback you're doing, but in PIR-HEG, again, after 5 to 8 sessions, often people have more emotion, sort of the view of their emotional life sort of expands, and they're able to grieve certain things. So they might notice like an experience from their own childhood and say, I recognize that really affected me, or I recognize that I was unprotected in that situation. And they may have some sadness associated with that new awareness. So in this kind of way of thinking, when we're in survival mode or when we're in an automatic sort of mode in our stress system, we're not grieving, we're not relating to our experience, our individual experience of things, and being in touch with that enough to grieve and to allow that tension to diminish again through that awareness. So instead, inhibited grief and rising tension over time is what people are experiencing under the surface. As they start to regulate, you're going to notice that people can locate themselves. They can become aware of personal loss associated with different kinds of events in their lives. They might recognize their own experience and the loss of things like safety, connection, privacy, protection. So we're talking about grief, not in terms of losing other humans in their lives, but their own personal experience of what events and things in their life have meant to them. And it's almost as if their own individual view of that was covered over by their stress responses. And now it's opened up again. And people can feel their emotions. They can use those emotions to make sense of things in their lives. And so one of the things that I think we can pay attention to for people is, how do we witness this new contact with emotions? And how do we teach them, again, showing up again as teacher and ambassador to health? I know a lot of people will say, well, I felt more sad this week. I think I'm going backwards, right? And sort of to help people understand what it means to be in contact with emotions, and that it's not about going backwards. It's about noticing what I didn't notice before and helping them to make sense of that in a new way. So that's one other really key opportunity, is to notice people's abilities to tolerate new emotional experiences and to reflect with them, and to see this new openness that people have, because the tension associated with emotions is in check. It's not as overwhelming. So people are able to notice more, try new things, be less defensive, be less resistant, be less avoidant, and to believe in some way that they can. Another thing, I'll just highlight a couple of more things really quickly, because I want to make sure we have time for questions. This is another kind of aspect of data, some quotes from people. A lot of people talking about self-agency. So things like, it feels like I'm on the ball. There's a sense of, I can handle this. I feel like I'm standing up for myself. I have more authority over what I want. So again, listening for that, listening for changes in the way they talk, the way their narrative is phrased, and looking for these kinds of opportunities or experiences. So people are promoting themselves, their own interests, their own goals, their own priorities in their actions. They can notice what's coming from them and what's coming from other people, as if they can notice sort of the difference between themselves and others. They can notice what's in their control and what's not in their control. They can become better at decision making, setting boundaries, and feeling more empowered in their lives. And as you notice, if you're attuned to this as an outcome from neurofeedback, again, you're paying attention to each thing as it comes online. So you might get more curious when people start to talk to you about a decision they made, to really orient yourself to what led to that. Help me understand that. Tell me more about that, right? So in a very similar way to what we might see in like motivational interviewing, where what you are asking about and reflecting back, you're inviting people's consciousness to incorporate more of that, right? And in the same way, by knowing kind of where the neurofeedback is likely to allow people to function better, you can really target that in the way you talk with people and what you're noticing with them. And this is, I think kind of a good quote from Sieber and Fisher about neurofeedback's global impact on people, right? Not just on the targeted symptoms, but on the overall dimensionality of the person. And as we focus in and notice those changes, I think we can really advance clinical progress even faster. So we're getting towards quarter of. Just going to skip ahead to this. I know that with a lot of neurofeedback systems that people may use, there's data, right, from the system itself that you can share with people as another source of information. In the PIR-HEG system, there really isn't that. And I have used my own clinical data as another source. But I think this is a really key thing in neurofeedback, is just using multiple sources of data, multiple lenses that you're looking through to understand what's happening, what's changing, and in what way is it changing. And I think with that kind of focus, you're kind of inviting people to use their critical thinking skills, and you're inviting them to notice, why is your mood going up and down? What's happening that would predict that? Help me understand that. Let's look at that from an overall perspective on what's improving and what's not. So in my practice, this would be an example of sharing clinical data with people from the questionnaires that they fill out. I would share these kinds of graphs with them in terms of like what's happening over time, in terms of anxiety and depression, in terms of general self-efficacy, things like that. And then we would talk about, kind of like this person started out in these high numbers of anxiety and depression and came way down, and then bobbed around in these, in a different range. And we might talk about that in different ways in terms of understanding, what's resilient about being able to go up and down in a short, a more livable range. So using clinical data to support the process, and then be kind of able to connect the dots with people, and be curious about how they're integrating kind of all of these new experiences, helping them to reshape their narrative of themselves as these new experiences are coming into their lives. So that's where I guess that's where I'll stop for now and see if there's any questions or things people would like to talk about related to this.
What a fine presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
There's lots of questions coming in, so I'll
Okay.
go ahead and start. One of the questions, what was the age range of the participants?
Yeah, 18 to 60 something. Yeah.
Wide range.
Wide range, yeah.
And the next question is, or statement, it's great you collect the data that you collect. What accounts for the decrease in the number of subjects completing the forms as the study progressed?
Good question. It's just basically where I stopped collecting in order to write this up. So I had collected this over a number of years just as people came into my practice. So it takes a long time to accomplish that. And because we had 60 plus people who had come in for at least 5, it seemed like the right time to write it up.
Next question is, what kind of PIR-HEG system are you using? And then any advice for clinicians that are intending to add it as a tool? Thank you.
So I use Jeff Carmen's Easy PIR system. I'm actually in the, Jeff works and lives very nearby, and I initially went to one of his local trainings. But yeah, that's the system that I use. my advice is to purchase the system and do Jeff's training with him, and then experiment for how it can be helpful. I think that in working with Jeff and in hearing different people's views of PIR-HEG over the last several years, most people who are pretty experienced in this field will say, I haven't used it a lot, but the more I use it, the more I appreciate what it can do. And so I would just say that you're gonna buy into kind of this view of how it can be helpful, mostly by using it and observing for yourself the effects. It's not hard to notice generally. Yeah.
Next question is, in these sessions you did for the study, was it HEG alone or talk therapy along with it?
Well, I guess it depends on what you define that as. It was PIR-HEG for part of the session, and the rest of the session was talk. So, but generally the focus was on, as I've kind of clarified, on the neurofeedback and on the changes in function. So, if within 5 sessions you're seeing these changes, that is what I'm focused on for the talk part. We're not getting into other areas. We're really the talk is focused on the coping changes and these experiences of new emotional contact, empowerment, self-agency. And so that it sort of all becomes part of the same thing in a way.
Thank you. The next question. I'm sorry, I'm not reading the names of the people asking the questions. I'm going to start that. So Amy Jeffries is asking, is your limbic overload scale something other clinicians could use?
Yes, they could contact me and I would be happy for them to use it. Yep.
And Lucinda Bollinger said, this is a wonderful presentation. Thank you. And then Julie Weiner is saying, do you use his infrared camera system to view effect on brain blood flow too?
I don't. So my sense of that, and this might be different than how other people see it. I don't see the need for it, as it seems like a validation of the method to see those changes pre-post. I feel like Jeff has, I think he said in his talk or in his recent podcast, he has something like 45,000 of these images. And so I sort of believe it, and I don't need to use it as part of the practice. I focus instead on these other kinds of clinical measurements.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Shirley Ho asks, how long do the changes last?
Well, that is a great question. So, in my experience with people, my more anecdotal experience is that when people come for neurofeedback, especially if they come for between 12 and 20 sessions, it seems to last, meaning like the brain, and Jeff would say through negative feedback loops, the brain sort of likes this less reactive pattern and keeps it. I don't know the answer to that though, right? And kind of what makes how much is enough and for how long does that help? Certainly have people, who want to come back in or get boosters at some point. And so that, that makes sense too, that brains need kind of reminders and can, with more neurofeedback, can enhance function in a new way. I do think that something in general, obviously there needs to be better studies done on all of this. But also, the things that some researchers have talked about, like post-treatment effects, that the results actually get stronger post-treatment. That is something that really needs to be looked at. Because once the brain is kind of, especially when you're talking about the prefrontal cortex becoming more dominant and enhanced in its activity. With time, obviously, that part of the brain is making new connections. And so you would expect in some way for that to play out over time. And I don't know the answer to how long, you might see that for.
Real interesting though, if I understand what you're asking or implying, is that maybe there's a effect that gets stronger, so longer, more lasting, more built into the system, like a form that is being taken.
Right. Yeah. And I think that again, if you're seeing people like, for that first 12 or 20 sessions, say, of neurofeedback, and you're helping to kind of instigate this movement, right, through the neurofeedback itself, but then also through the intentional practice in the ways that I was describing earlier, it seems that you're really setting a new course, a new trajectory.
Next question is from Danae Barahona. Can it be done more than once a week?
It's not recommended for this type of prefrontal neurofeedback to be done more than once a week due to fatigue, frontal fatigue. My experience with that is absolutely, there seems to be no benefit at all of doing it more frequently. And oftentimes actually decreasing it to every other week, even for some people, results in better outcomes. And so that might speak again to this post-treatment effects and what happens when the prefrontal cortex is engaged and then left to its own devices.
Thank you. Following up on the infrared camera question, follow-up was, are there any other physical measures that you
Unfortunately, no, there's no other physical measure that comes along with the system. Not something that you can compare anyway, session to session.
Thank you. Paulo Rabello asks, how long are the PIR sessions in general?
So between 20 and 30 minutes. So we're looking at, in that system, there's active training time, which we want in a 3-to-1 or 1-to-3 ratio with overall time. So people are training, kind of really engaging the prefrontal cortex for about 10 minutes over a period of 20 or 30 minutes.
And hopefully I say the name correctly. Yerach Mael Donowitz asks, what is the actual time spent on the neurofeedback? I guess that's very similar, neurofeedback during each session. So I think you addressed that. And then Julie Weiner asks, how do you know when to reduce to alternate weeks?
Well, that's a good question. There's not really a clear map for that. I've had some people who will tell me that in the day or two after the session, sometimes they feel less well, in a sense. They might feel tired or a little bit foggy at times, and that might mean that for whatever reason, for their brain, it's strong. The effects of it are strong, and they have a perceptive, they're able to perceive that. So that might be an indication, like, let's just spread it out more and see if your brain doesn't sort of have that kind of an impact after the session as much. That also usually will go away if you just keep the sessions going, but with time, their tolerance to it will increase. And then some other people where you see glimpses of changes, but maybe they're not setting up as a pattern. And in those cases, I also might suggest every other week, again, just to see what the brain will do on its own in between, like looking for that opportunity for greater integration and greater consistency of states across time.
Last question I see here is from Vandana Samuel. What are your thoughts about the home trainer method? I think it says Mendy, but I think that means method.
Yeah, I think it's actually Mendy. It's a home training device based on near infrared HEG. So it's not the same method. It's not PIR HEG. It's NIR. Obviously related in the sense that it's training prefrontal directly. And so I don't know. I've been following Mendy a little bit. I have a colleague we're doing a little bit of a pilot study of her implementing it, doing the Mendy 5 minutes at the beginning of a therapy session, and then sort of tracking what effects that has. So I think that's the question. I think the interesting quandary that we're in with the PIR HEG is, again, how uncomplicated and quick these effects can be for people. I don't know if the Mendy can produce something similar. If it could, that would have, I think, large ramifications for how we think about neurofeedback in the future, and in terms of home devices in particular.
Well, thank you very much. That may be all the questions that I see listed here. So
Great. Well, and if anyone has any further questions, you could certainly reach out and, email me. I'd be happy to answer questions at any time. And if you're interested in, kind of my work and how I'm articulating these things, again, you can, go to my website and learn more about my practice and register for the training if you're interested. So I really appreciate the opportunity, Lexi.
Oh, well, thank you so much on behalf of NRBS. It was great having you. And for everybody else, do check out our website as we have upcoming events, and stay posted. Become a member if you're not already a member. And we look forward to seeing you all the next time.
Great.
Thanks
Thank you.
so much. Bye-bye.
Appreciate it. Take care.